when arrogant alien military commander Zek'tar decides to publicly humiliate what he assumes is a weak human cadet during a joint training exercise, he makes the fatal mistake of striking Corporal Maya Chen. What follows is 30 seconds of pure human fury that will become legend across 17 star systems. Look, I need to tell you something right up front. We Thraxians pride ourselves on being logical, methodical, and above all superior to most other species in the galaxy. Our military academies produce the finest warriors, our technology spans star systems, and our battle prowess is legendary. So when I tell you what happened on Station Nexus 7 that day, understand that it pains me deeply to admit how spectacularly wrong we got things. Station Nexus 7 floated in the void between the Kepler and Orion sectors, a massive rotating wheel of metal and ambition that housed the Galactic Military Academy. The station served one primary purpose, turning various alien species into a cohesive fighting force. Noble goal, really. Shame about the execution. The Academy buzzed with activity 26 hours a day, 7 days a week. Corridors echoed with the chittering of Mantoid recruits, the heavy footfalls of Krogan warriors, and the soft whispers of ethereal Zephyrians. It was, by all accounts, a melting pot of galactic military might. Then the humans arrived. Commander Zek'tar stood 8 feet tall, even without his ceremonial battle armor. His blue-grey skin bore the ritual scars of 17 successful campaigns, and his 4 arms could crush durasteel with casual ease. He had earned his position through blood, sweat, and the occasional tactical genocide of rebellious colonies. In short, he was everything a Thraxian military commander should be, brutal, efficient, and completely convinced of his own superiority. These soft-skinned primates, Zek'tar muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Vorth, as they watched a group of human cadets file into the main training bay. Look at them. No natural weapons, no armor plating, no redundant organs. How did such pathetic creatures even achieve spaceflight? The humans did look rather unimpressive, to be fair. They averaged about 6 feet in height, possessed only 2 arms each, and their pale pink skin looked about as durable as wet tissue paper. Most of them appeared to be barely out of adolescence, with that peculiar human tendency to smile at inappropriate moments. The joint training program had been the brainchild of some political committee back on Galactic Central. The idea apparently was to integrate these newly discovered humans into the greater galactic military structure, noble in theory, absolutely ridiculous in practice. Sir, Lieutenant Vorth clicked his mandibles nervously. The intelligence reports suggest we should not underestimate them. Their species survived several global wars using nothing but chemical explosives and primitive projectile weapons. Zek'tar's laugh rumbled through his chest cavity like distant thunder. Primitive projectile weapons? Vorth, I once killed a saber-toothed gorilloid with my bare hands. These humans conquered their planet by throwing metal pellets at each other. I fail to see how that qualifies them for modern warfare. The training bay stretched across 3 levels, with observation decks allowing instructors and visiting commanders to monitor the proceedings below. Today's exercise was simple, integrated combat training between different species, designed to foster cooperation and mutual respect. What could possibly go wrong? Zek'tar settled into his observation position, all 4 arms crossed in obvious disdain. Below, human cadets mingled with Thraxian, Mantoid and Krogan trainees. The size difference was almost comical. The average Krogan stood 9 feet tall and weighed as much as a small transport vehicle. The Mantoids, while smaller, possessed razor-sharp appendages that could slice through battle armor. Even the youngest Thraxian cadet could bench-press a hovercycle. This will be educational, Zek'tar mused, watching a particularly small human female adjusting her training gear. She couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds soaking wet. Her name tag read Chen, M, in standard galactic script. Perhaps witnessing their inevitable defeat will convince Central Command to abandon this foolish integration program. The training instructor, a grizzled Mantoid veteran named Sergeant Clax, began organizing the cadets into sparring pairs. The official policy called for cross-species partnerships to encourage understanding and cooperation. The unofficial result was typically a series of one-sided beatdowns that sent human cadets to the medical bay with bruised egos and fractured bones. Today we practice restraint and control, Sergeant Clax announced, his translator device rendering his chittering into standard galactic. The purpose is not to dominate, but to learn from each other's fighting styles and capabilities. Zek'tar snorted. What could these humans possibly teach anyone about combat? Their own planet's military history consisted mainly of standing in lines and shooting at each other from increasingly ridiculous distances. They had never faced opponents with natural weapons, enhanced strength, or superior technology. Sir Lieutenant Vorth ventured again, perhaps we should observe without commentary. The integration program is officially sanctioned by bureaucrats who have never seen real combat, Zek'tar interrupted. Watch carefully, Vorth. In approximately 10 minutes we will have conclusive proof that humans belong nowhere near a battlefield. Below, the sparring matches began, and indeed they proceeded exactly as Zek'tar expected. Human cadets found themselves outmatched, outmuscled, and generally out everything else by their alien counterparts. Most matches ended quickly, with humans yielding before serious injury occurred. All except one. Maya Chen stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with the kind of build that suggested she spent more time reading technical manuals than lifting weights. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation military bun, and her dark eyes held a quiet intelligence that most of her instructors had noted in their reports. What they had not noted, because humans are apparently very good at keeping certain things to themselves, was that Maya Chen had grown up in a place called Detroit. For those unfamiliar with human geography, Detroit is what humans refer to as a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where survival depends less on following rules and more on understanding exactly how far you can push someone before they push back hard. Zek'tar watched with growing impatience as the sparring matches continued below. The humans were losing, as expected, but they were losing with an annoying amount of dignity. Most yielded gracefully when outmatched, shook hands with their opponents, and generally behaved in a manner that suggested they had learned something valuable from the experience. This was not what Zek'tar wanted to see. Sergeant Clax, Zek'tar's voice boomed through the training bay's communication system, causing several cadets to jump. I believe this exercise would benefit from some additional supervision. Before anyone could object, Zek'tar vaulted over the observation deck railing, landing with a thunderous crash that dented the training mat. At 8 feet tall and weighing roughly 600 pounds, his arrival had the subtlety of a meteor impact. "Continue," he announced to the startled cadets, all 4 arms spread wide in a gesture that was probably meant to look encouraging, but instead resembled a predator sizing up prey. "Do not let my presence interfere with your learning." Maya Chen had been paired with a young mantoid cadet, who was doing his best to practice the restraint and control that Sergeant Clax had emphasized. The match was proceeding slowly, with both participants clearly more interested in not injuring each other than in actually winning. This, apparently, was exactly what Zek'tar had been waiting for. "Stop," he commanded, striding toward Maya and her partner. The mantoid cadet immediately backed away, recognizing the approach of a superior predator. Maya, however, simply stood her ground and waited. "Cadet Chen," Zek'tar read from her name tag, pronouncing it with the kind of disdain usually reserved for discussing parasitic infections. "You are not fighting, you are dancing. Is this how humans plan to contribute to galactic defense? With interpretive movement?" A few alien cadets chittered with nervous laughter. Maya's expression remained perfectly neutral, though something flickered behind her eyes that a more observant commander might have recognized as a warning sign. "Sir, I was following the exercise parameters," Maya replied in a voice so calm it was almost unsettling. "Restraint and control as instructed." Zek'tar's secondary arms flexed with irritation. "Restraint? Control?" His voice rose to carry across the entire training bay. "These are luxuries for species that possess actual combat capabilities. Humans require different instruction." The training bay had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the Krogan cadets, not known for their social sensitivity, seemed to sense that something unpleasant was about to happen. "Perhaps," Zek'tar continued, circling Maya like a shark scenting blood, "a practical demonstration would be more educational. Show me this famous human adaptability. Attack me." Maya tilted her head slightly, the way humans do when they are processing information that does not compute. "Sir, that would not be appropriate. You are not wearing protective gear." And "Attack me," Zek'tar repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Or admit that humans have no business training alongside real warriors." The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Maya glanced around the training bay, taking in the faces of her fellow cadets, the instructors, and the growing crowd of onlookers. When she spoke again, her voice carried the same supernatural calm. "Sir, I respectfully decline. This exercise is designed for..." Zek'tar's primary right hand moved faster than most organic beings could track. The slap connected with Maya's left cheek with enough force to stagger a normal human, the sound echoing through the training bay like a gunshot. For exactly 2.3 seconds, Maya stood perfectly still, her head turned at the angle the blow had forced it. Her cheek bore the clear imprint of Zek'tar's palm, already beginning to swell. In that moment of absolute silence, every being in the training bay held their breath. Then Maya slowly turned her head back to face Zek'tar, and her smile was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. "Oh," she said, in a voice like silk wrapped around a blade, "you should not have done that." What happened next would be studied in military academies across 17 star systems, analyzed frame by frame, and ultimately used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions based on size, apparent strength, or species classification. But Zek'tar, in that moment, only had time for one coherent thought before Maya Chen introduced him to the concept of Detroit-style conflict resolution. He had made a very, very serious mistake. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The quiet, respectful cadet disappeared, replaced by something that moved with the fluid precision of a born predator. Maya's stance shifted, her weight settling into her hips, her hands rising to a position that suggested she had done this before, many times. 30 seconds, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. That's how long this is going to take. Zek'tar, despite every instinct screaming at him to back down, to apologize, to do literally anything other than continue this confrontation, discovered that pride is a particularly stubborn form of stupidity. He swung his secondary left arm in a backhanded blow that should have sent Maya across the room. Second one. Maya ducked under Zek'tar's swing with the kind of fluid motion that suggested she had been expecting exactly this attack. Her right hand shot forward, fingers extended, and connected with a nerve cluster just below his third rib. The strike looked almost gentle, like she was simply tapping him to get his attention. Zek'tar's entire left side went numb. "What in the seven hells?" he gasped, staggering backward. His secondary left arm dangled uselessly, completely unresponsive to his mental commands. Maya had already moved, circling him with the patient grace of a predator who knew the prey was already caught. Second 3. Human anatomy lesson, Maya said conversationally, as if she were teaching a class instead of systematically dismantling a decorated military commander. Pressure points, nerve clusters, structural weak spots. Amazing what you can learn when your species spends most of its evolutionary history trying to kill each other with pointy sticks. Lieutenant Vorth, watching from the observation deck, felt his mandibles clicking uncontrollably. "Sir," he whispered to no one in particular, "this is not proceeding according to expectations." Second 5. Zek'tar attempted to grab Maya with his primary arms, relying on his reach advantage and superior strength. Maya stepped inside his guard, her left elbow connecting with his solar plexus in a precise strike that folded him forward like a collapsing accordion. The impact drove every molecule of air from his lungs. Thraxians, it turned out, had the same unfortunate vulnerability to diaphragm strikes as most other oxygen-breathing species. Second 7. While Zek'tar wheezed and gasped, Maya's right hand found another pressure point along his neck. His primary right arm joined his secondary left in complete rebellion against his nervous system. "The thing about being a superior warrior," Maya continued in that same eerily calm voice, "is that it usually requires, actual combat experience against opponents who fight back." Second 9. A Krogan cadet in the crowd turned to his mantoid partner. "Is this normal for humans?" he rumbled in confusion. "I do not believe so," the mantoid replied, his compound eyes fixed on the systematic destruction taking place below, "though I begin to suspect we may have misunderstood several things about their species." Second 11. Zek'tar, now functioning with only one working arm, attempted a desperate headbutt. Maya tilted her head slightly to the right, letting his momentum carry him past her, then drove her knee into his kidney with surgical precision. The commander's roar of pain echoed through the training bay, but it carried a note of panic now. The crowd was completely silent, watching in fascination as 8 feet and 600 pounds of apex predator was methodically taken apart by someone who looked like she should be filing paperwork instead of destroying military careers. Second 14. "You know what your problem is?" Maya asked, catching Zek'tar's wrist as he swung wildly with his remaining functional arm. She twisted it in a direction that Thraxian joints were definitely not designed to bend. The crack was audible throughout the training bay. "Your problem," she continued over his scream, is that you assumed weak meant helpless. Second 17. Zek'tar's remaining arm now hung at an unnatural angle. Maya stepped back, studying him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. Sergeant Clax, who had been frozen in shock since the confrontation began, finally found his voice. Cadet Chen, that is sufficient. 13 seconds left, Maya interrupted without taking her eyes off Zek'tar. I said 30 seconds, I keep my promises. Second 19. In desperation, Zek'tar attempted to use his superior mass, charging forward in what could generously be called a tackle and more accurately described as a controlled fall. Maya sidestepped with minimal effort, her foot finding the back of his knee as he passed. Basic physics took over from there. Second 21. Zek'tar hit the training mat face first with enough force to leave a commander-shaped depression in the supposedly indestructible surface. Maya was already moving, positioning herself for what everyone present somehow knew would be the final exchange. The really embarrassing part, she said, grabbing a handful of his ceremonial hair, is that I learned most of this from watching old movies. Second 24. She lifted his head just enough to make eye contact. Zek'tar, through his pain and shock, found himself staring into eyes that held absolutely no mercy whatsoever. Earth movies, Maya clarified. You know, made by those primitive primates who conquered their planet by throwing metal pellets at each other. Second 27. Maya's fist connected with Zek'tar's jaw in a perfectly executed uppercut that would have made any human boxing coach weep with pride. The commander's eyes rolled back in his head, consciousness fleeing like a coward, abandoning a sinking ship. Second 30. Zek'tar's body went completely limp. Maya released her grip and let him fall back to the mat with a wet thud that seemed to echo forever in the absolute silence of the training bay. Maya straightened her uniform, checked her chronometer, and nodded with satisfaction. 30 seconds exactly, she announced to the stunned crowd. I hate being late. The silence stretched for several more heartbeats before Lieutenant Vorth's voice cracked through the training bay's communication system. Medic to Training Bay 7, Code Blue, bring. A young Zephyrian cadet whispered to her companion, I thought humans were supposed to be the peaceful ones. Her companion, a grizzled mantoid who had seen combat on 6 different worlds, shook his head slowly. I think, he said with the wisdom of someone who had just had his worldview completely restructured, we may have been operating under some significant misconceptions. Maya looked around the training bay, taking in the shocked faces, the slack jaws, and the general atmosphere of beings who had just witnessed something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the universe. So, she said brightly, her voice returning to the cheerful tone of a helpful cadet, does anyone else want to practice restraint and control? The silence was answer enough. Zek'tar lay unconscious on the training mat, drooling slightly onto the surface that bore the imprint of his dramatic introduction to human conflict resolution. His ceremonial scars, earned through 17 successful campaigns against species who fought according to predictable rules, seemed somehow less impressive now. Maya Chen, all 5 feet 4 inches of her, stood over the wreckage of his reputation like a monument to the dangers of making assumptions. And in training bays across 17 star systems, the video of what would become known as the slap heard round the galaxy was already beginning to circulate through military networks, carrying with it a simple but profound message. Maybe, just maybe, those soft-skinned primates were not quite what they seemed. Zek'tar regained consciousness 3 hours later in the medical bay, staring at a ceiling that seemed to be spinning independently of the rest of the universe. His first coherent thought was that someone had replaced his skeleton with broken glass and regret. His second thought was considerably more urgent. Damage control. Computer, he croaked through a throat that felt like he had been gargling with quantum razor blades. Access my personal communication array. Priority Alpha classification. The medical bay's AI responded with the kind of cheerful efficiency that made injured warriors want to strangle programmers. I am sorry, Commander Zek'tar, but your personal communication privileges have been temporarily suspended pending a full investigation into Training Bay 7 Incident 2084-7 Alpha. Zek'tar's blood pressure spiked so dramatically that the monitoring equipment began playing what could only be described as a techno remix of medical emergency alerts. By the time he convinced the medical staff to let him access a basic communication terminal, the video had already spread through the Galactic Military Network like a particularly virulent strain of embarrassment. Worse, someone had added slow-motion replays, and helpful annotations pointing out exactly which pressure points Maya had targeted. Even worse than that, someone else had set the whole thing to music. "Vorth," Zek'tar barked into the communicator as soon as his aide answered. "Tell me this situation has not gotten out of hand." Lieutenant Vorth's mandibles clicked nervously through the speaker. "Sir, I regret to inform you that the situation has in fact gotten extremely out of hand. The video has been viewed approximately 47 million times in the past 3 hours. There is also a remix version that has somehow become the #1 download on the Mantoid music charts." Zek'tar closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 7 different languages. It did not help. Furthermore, Vorth continued with the enthusiasm of someone delivering news about a plague outbreak. Commander Thrax from the Orion sector has posted his own encounter with human military personnel. Apparently, a human sergeant named Johnson once arm-wrestled 3 Krogan warriors simultaneously, and one while eating something called a sandwich. "That is impossible," Zek'tar growled. "Sir, there is video evidence. Also, Commander Gorth from the Centauri station has shared a recording of a human pilot named Martinez, who apparently convinced a Zephyrian dreadnought to surrender by transmitting what humans call a strongly worded email." Zek'tar felt something that might have been his sanity beginning to slip away. "Vorth, please tell me you are making this up." "I am afraid not, sir." The email was quite strongly worded indeed. It included several suggestions about what the Zephyrian captain could do with his ship that appear to be physically impossible, even by human standards. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of increasingly desperate attempts at reputation management. Zek'tar contacted every military publication editor he knew, called in favors dating back to the Proxima campaign, and even considered bribing a few journalists to spin the story in his favor. Nothing worked. The problem, as it turned out, was that the story was inherently unspinnable. There was no context that made decorated alien commander get systematically destroyed by small human cadet in 30 seconds sound like anything other than what it was, a comprehensive demonstration that the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities was fundamentally flawed. Making matters worse, other commanders began sharing their own human encounter stories with the enthusiasm of survivors comparing war wounds. Colonel Vex from the Tau sector described watching a human engineer named Rodriguez fix a quantum drive using nothing but something called duct tape and what appeared to be profanity in 17 languages. Admiral Quenth shared footage of a human chef named Williams, who had ended a 3-day standoff by preparing something called pancakes for both sides, leading to what military historians would later record as the first peace treaty negotiated entirely through breakfast foods. The stories kept coming, each one more impossible than the last, each one meticulously documented, and each one suggesting that perhaps humanity's integration into galactic military forces was not the comedy of errors everyone had assumed it would be. 3 weeks after what the media had dubbed a slap heard round the galaxy, Zek'tar received his new assignment orders. He read them twice, hoping he had misunderstood something crucial about his immediate future. He had not. "Frontier Outpost Zeta 9, he read aloud to his empty quarters. "Mining Station Supervisor, Asteroid Belt Patrol and Ore Processing Oversight." Zeta 9 was located in what could generously be called the middle of absolutely nowhere, orbiting a dying star that barely produced enough energy to power a small refrigeration unit. The station's primary function was to oversee the extraction of minerals that nobody particularly wanted from asteroids that nobody particularly cared about. It was, in other words, the kind of assignment given to commanders whose careers had suffered what military personnel referred to as a rapid atmospheric decompression event. Meanwhile, Corporal Maya Chen had been promoted to sergeant and transferred to the Academy's Advanced Combat Instruction Program. Her official title was Interspecies Combat Dynamics Specialist. Her unofficial title, according to the betting pools that had sprung up across the station, was the Slap Avenger. Students from 17 different species now lined up to take her classes, hoping to learn the secrets of human combat effectiveness. Maya, for her part, seemed to find the whole situation amusing. "The funny thing," she had told a reporter from Galactic Military Weekly, "is that I was actually holding back. I did not want to seriously hurt him." This quote, naturally, became the most shared statement in Galactic Military social media history. Zek'tar, packing his belongings for transfer to Outpost Zeta 9, tried very hard not to think about what holding back might have looked like. 6 months after the slap heard round the galaxy, The galactic military landscape had undergone what historians would later describe as a fundamental paradigm shift, though most beings involved preferred the term massive cosmic-scale reality check. Training protocols across all military academies now included mandatory courses on human combat psychology and pressure point awareness for non-human species. The Galactic Military Command had issued new guidelines stating that human cadets were no longer to be considered soft targets for confidence-building exercises. This change came after a series of incidents that military psychologists were still trying to understand. A human private named Thompson had apparently ended a bar fight involving 12 Krogan warriors by using what witnesses described as aggressive politeness, and a technique involving a folded napkin that somehow rendered 3 of them unconscious. The footage was still classified, though rumors suggested it would be used for advanced psychological warfare training. Meanwhile, Zek'tar was learning to appreciate the simple pleasures of asteroid mining supervision. His days consisted of monitoring ore extraction rates, filing reports that no one would ever read, and trying not to think about the 30 seconds that had destroyed his military career. Unfortunately, his nights were a different matter entirely. The nightmares always followed the same pattern. Maya Chen, all 5 feet 4 inches of her, standing in his quarters at Outpost Zeta 9, smiling that terrifying smile. "Hello, Commander," she would say in that impossibly calm voice. "Time for another lesson in human anatomy." He would wake up screaming, covered in perspiration, and spend the rest of the night checking the seals on his quarters' blast doors. The worst part was not the nightmares themselves, but the growing certainty that they were not entirely irrational. Every few weeks, Zek'tar received messages from former colleagues describing new human incidents that defied all logical explanation. Commander Bricks reported that a human supply officer named Williams had somehow convinced a Mantoid strike team to surrender by showing them pictures of something called kittens. The psychological warfare implications were still being studied by experts who had trouble sleeping after viewing the evidence. Captain Thorne shared security footage of a human maintenance worker named Garcia, who had repaired a critical life support system, using nothing but creative profanity and what appeared to be a hammer made from compressed regret. The system had never functioned better. Maya Chen, for her part, had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, much to her obvious amusement. She gave interviews with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she was discussing the weather rather than the systematic destruction of preconceived notions about human military capabilities. "People keep asking me if I planned the whole thing," she told one particularly persistent reporter, "like I somehow knew that Commander Zek'tar would decide to slap me and I prepared a 30-second response strategy. The truth is much simpler. I grew up in Detroit. When someone hits you, you hit back harder. It is not complicated." When asked about her thoughts on the changes to galactic military training, Maya had shrugged in that uniquely human way that seemed to convey entire philosophical treatises through shoulder movement. "I think it is good that people are finally paying attention. Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We got pretty good at it. The mistake most alien species made was assuming that because we are not naturally armored or enhanced, we must be naturally peaceful. That is like assuming that because a weapon does not look dangerous, it cannot hurt you." The reporter had asked if she had any advice for commanders who might find themselves facing human opponents in the future. Maya's smile, according to the interview transcript, had been visible from orbit. "Do not slap them," she had said simply. "Seriously, just do not do it." As for the broader implications, military strategists across the galaxy were still attempting to recalculate threat assessments for human forces. The problem, as one Thraxian general admitted in a classified briefing, was that humans seem to operate by rules that no other species had ever encountered. "They fight like they have nothing to lose and everything to prove," the general had noted. "But they also negotiate like they would rather be friends than enemies. They will destroy you in combat, then offer to buy you dinner afterward. It is psychologically destabilizing." Zek'tar, monitoring his ore extraction reports in the cold depths of space, could have told them that psychological destabilization was indeed the correct term. Every time he looked at his reflection, he saw not a decorated military commander, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of making assumptions. The galaxy had learned many lessons from the 30 seconds that changed everything. The most important one was perhaps the simplest: never ever underestimate the species that conquered their own planet by throwing metal pellets at each other. Especially if they offer to shake your hand afterward. They probably mean it as a friendly gesture. Probably.